This comes from Matthew, who had some really nice words about the podcast, so thank you to him for that. I appreciate that. Out of the following of Vince McMahon's longtime trusted and past successful backstage employees, who do you feel has played the most significant role in terms of the product's success and or dominance? Kevin Dunn, Pat Patterson as an agent, Linda McMahon, Jim Johnston, Brian Gewirtz, Vince Russo, Jim Ross, Triple H, or Jerry McDevitt? That's an odd last choice to throw in there. I mean, he has been important, but I wouldn't say to the success and dominance of the company. That's an interesting list you put together there. I have been thinking about that. And I'm going to say, the three names. I'll whittle it down to one, but the three names that jump out at me as being the most important and the most significant: Pat Patterson, Jim Ross, and Jim Johnston. And Jim Johnston, for all the obvious reasons, because I don't think he is criminally underrated, his position in history. Why he isn't in the Hall of Fame, I have no idea. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame more than a lot of people do, more than a lot of wrestlers do, including people who were already in. Theme music is a huge part of the presentation of every wrestler, and he has had a lot to do with that over the years. And I know now they're using their own in-house band that they kind of brought in, that CFO Money group. My impression is that Jim Johnston is still around. I think he's still doing some of the music. He may be working with CFO Money. I don't think he's gone. It just seems like they're now kind of taking over and coming up with a lot of that music, so that years from now they won't have to worry about dubbing over music, because it'll be their own music that they own. So it's smart, I guess, of them to do that. But Jim Johnston does not get nearly enough credit. It's sad. It's too bad more people don't know who he is, because he really is that important a figure in WWE history. Pat Patterson, also a very important figure in history. He's had, there's been a lot of controversy over the years involving Patterson going back to the 80s and the early 90s. But despite all of that, he's a smart guy. I mean, the one thing you hear from wrestlers that have worked with him, especially on match finishes, he's like the king of match finishes. He's the brainchild behind the Royal Rumble concept. When he used to wrestle out on the West Coast, supposedly he saw there was another promoter whose name escapes me, who would have basically Royal Rumble matches. It's not like the Royal Rumble match is something he invented. I think it's something he saw either when he was growing up or when he was wrestling out west, and he brought it over. He pitched it to Vince. But he is the brainchild behind the Royal Rumble match in WWE. And very creative guy when it comes to match finishes and things of that nature. Plus, as an on-air character, I talked about the Stooges earlier, Patterson and Briscoe. Fucking great. I love it. So Patterson is definitely an important figure, but I'm gonna go, if I have to pick one name, I've got to go with Jim Ross. And that includes his body of work on camera as an announcer and behind the scenes in talent relations, scouting talent, pitching talent. I mean, he's talked about this before. He loves to take credit for helping bring Mick Foley into WWE. When Vince McMahon wouldn't have given him a second look, JR fought hard for him, and Vince said, fine, it's on you, though. It's on you if this doesn't work. And Foley made it work. He went on to become one of the biggest stars in the history of that company. He also had a lot to do with recruiting and bringing in Steve Austin, The Rock, Brock Lesnar as well, I believe, although Jerry Briscoe may have had something to do with that as well. So when you really look at everything that he was involved, he wore so many hats beyond just the black hat that you saw on TV. He wasn't just an announcer. He was the payroll guy. He was the talent relations guy. He was scouting talent for them. He did radio for them at one point. Their short-lived radio WWF experiment with him and Gorilla Monsoon that most people probably don't even know ever existed. So he did so many different things for that company, but I think when you look at the people he helped bring in, some of the biggest names in history, some of the biggest names of the Attitude Era, you can trace them working for WWE directly back to Jim Ross. And if it wasn't for JR, some of those guys never would have made it in. Not when they did. Timing is everything. Who knows how different things may have been. But I would go to him more so for what we all know him for the announcing. We complain a lot now about the announcers. Some of it is unfair. A lot of it is not. I think a lot of the criticism is warranted. But like I said, some of it is unfair because they're only doing what they're told. Okay, they're working for a madman who's in their ear constantly, and I'm sure that can't be easy. That being said, the announcing sucks. The announcing right now in wrestling, the announcing right now in WWE sucks. It is terrible. And it's a shame because people who watch this show now, little kids who watch this show, newer fans who watch this show, have no concept of what it's like to watch a wrestling show that has good announcing that can make the show better. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler at their peak, in their prime in the late 90s, made the shows better. They made the shows more enjoyable. Lawler was funny. And the banter with him and JR back and forth was great. Jim Ross, he was awesome. He knew exactly how he had to play things. He knew exactly when to get angry. He knew exactly when to be funny and humorous when he had to be. And he made you care. He made you care about the guys that you were watching in the ring. He made a match feel special even when maybe there was no reason to think the match was anything special. He had a way of making it feel special. Like, okay, this is a big match. I should care. I should give a shit about what I'm about to see. And he is the voice of a generation. He's the voice of so many great WrestleMania main events, so many classic calls. I mean, in a lot of ways it was kind of over the top, and he became a caricature in some ways. Now his commentary is dubbed over all these different sports clips and whipped like a government mule and all these different things. But I think that takes away from, who he really was as an announcer. It's almost a shame because he's turned into, in some people's eyes, they've made him into this cartoon character. But even with the over-the-top calls, I mean, he was the best at his craft. And growing up at the time, late 90s, a teenage wrestling fan, he was the voice of that whole era to me. I think of his face and the hat, the whole thing, the whole deal. Even the moment he first came into WWF, I mean, his style of commentary was so different than what we had heard from Gorilla Monsoon and Vince McMahon and Bobby Heenan. I mean, somebody who actually knew the names of more than 5 moves. And the King of the Ring in 1993, to me, is one of my all-time favorite pay-per-views for a lot of different reasons. Bret Hart was a big part of that. But one of the things I loved about that pay-per-view was the commentary. They had JR, Randy Savage, and Bobby Heenan, who also did the announcing of WrestleMania 9, but there was something about that pay-per-view that the commentary was just, it was special. It was really, really good. It added a lot to the show. I thought those three worked well together. I don't think all three of them worked together ever again. And I know JR has said that working with Macho Man was really not his idea of fun. It was very hard, apparently, to work with Randy Savage on commentary, but they made it work. And the biggest reason of all, just to kind of wrap this up here, that I would go with Jim Ross for all the reasons I just mentioned, but the commentary being the chief thing among them, is look at the product as it is today. The product is not good. And I said before, the commentary by and large is dreadful. And it's not entirely their fault, but it's dreadful. It takes away from the action, especially when they're cracking jokes to try to make each other laugh, and they're not talking about what's happening in the ring. It's terrible. And think about how many times we all agree, we all talk about how the commentary can drag a show down, how we wish there was a mute switch so we didn't have to work for them. There's an innovation for the WWE Network if they want to get people to subscribe. Come up with a way that we can have the option to mute the commentary when it gets that unbearable. How many times have we talked about that? How the commentary can ruin a show. It ruins your enjoyment in the product, and it shouldn't be that way. But then think about Jim Ross. How many times did you feel that way when Jim Ross was on Raw, on the pay-per-views, on commentary, doing his thing? Whether it was with Lawler, whether it was with Paul Heyman. I thought that was another great announced tandem. You could put him with anybody. Anybody. And they always did a good job. The commentary was never a detriment to the show. And it affected your enjoyment of the product. You may not have even realized it. But how many Attitude Era shows do you think were made that much better by the commentary? Take Michael Cole, Jerry Lawler today, and JBL. Okay, the announced team today. Transport them into the past, put them in the fucking DeLorean, and send them back to 1999. And you have them as your commentary team on any of those pay-per-views. You're going to tell me that pay-per-view is going to be as good as you remember it being? Of course not. Because the commentary can make that much of a difference. All those great shows that they had, And not all of them were great, but all those great shows they had were made that much better by that guy on commentary. And you don't realize it now that he's gone for so many years. It really hits you like, holy shit. I mean, I always liked the guy, but you never really truly appreciated him until he was gone. Because look at what we're left with now. They obviously didn't do a very good job of planning for the future. Michael Cole, I think, does a great job, and he has to do a lot of things too. He wears a lot of hats, but who else do they have? We talk about NXT, and they're cultivating all of this great talent, and they're bringing in guys from the indies, and it's great to finally see them, devoting that much time and effort to their developmental system. But what about the announcers? I mean, they're signing new guys here and there, but they haven't taken, the last several years to really train the next Jim Ross or the next Michael Cole. They've really neglected that. They dropped the ball. So it makes me appreciate, a guy like JR that much more. Out of all the guys on that list that you just gave me, the one guy who I would say of the bunch who has had the most to do with the success that they have had, or they were having, was Jim Ross. Eric from Los Angeles, how different would WWE be if it started out as a PG product and then transitioned into an attitude-type product? Would this have affected wrestling today? Well, I got news for you, Eric. It did start out as a PG product. Or at least, late 80s, early 90s was PG, and then it kind of started to get a little more risque from there, and now we've gone back to where we were, where we're PG again, but it's not like this was something new. I mean, they were PG originally. It wasn't like when Hulk Hogan was doing his thing in the 80s, he was pointing at his dick and saying, hey, ladies, it's not going to suck itself. Like, he wasn't doing stuff like that. That's actually a horrible visual right there.